He built an empire and called her trash, until the woman he discarded rose from the ruins, carrying his child and escorted by a billionaire who saw her worth. Hello family, welcome to True Life Stories. Please subscribe and leave a like for us, it means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The penthouse was silent, save for the distant hum of city traffic below and the rhythmic tick of an antique wall clock. Jonathan Stone's latest acquisition from a Parisian estate auction. Scarlett sat on the edge of the leather chaise lounge, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other clutching a half-folded envelope she hadn't opened yet. Her feet ached. Her back screamed. Her heart, however, was the heaviest thing in the room. She glanced at the entrance just as the front door swung open with a dramatic push, followed by the echo of designer shoes clicking against imported marble flooring. Jonathan entered like a man stepping onto a stage, sharp-tailored suit, loosened tie, and the unmistakable scent of champagne and ego. He carried a phone in one hand, barely sparing her a glance. His other hand gestured animatedly as he spoke. "Yeah, Forbes wants a quote. Tell them I'll give them 10 minutes tomorrow, Max," he said into the phone, grinning as though the world existed purely for his satisfaction. It's not every day a guy closes a 9-figure deal before lunch. He tossed the phone onto the credenza, peeled off his jacket, and finally turned toward her. Scarlett smiled faintly, hopeful despite herself. "I saw the news. Congratulations, Jonathan." He blinked. For a moment, he looked at her as if trying to remember what part she played in his life. Then he scoffed, walked to the kitchen, and pulled open the wine cooler. "Spare me the pageant smiles, Scarlett. We both know you had nothing to do with it." Her breath hitched. She straightened slowly, trying to shift the weight of her pregnancy, both physical and emotional. "I was just trying to be kind." "Kind," he repeated, now pouring himself a glass of Bordeaux. He took a long sip, his gaze settling on her, as if she were something unpleasant he'd stepped in. "You were the anchor, the dead weight I had to drag through law school, the one who begged me to stay when I had offers in New York and Singapore. And look at you now, barefoot, bloated, and waiting for me to throw you a bone like a dog." The words landed like slaps, each syllable sharp, calculated, unforgiving. Scarlett felt the familiar sting behind her eyes, but she refused to cry. Not in front of him. Not again. She rose carefully to her feet, hands instinctively moving to support her belly. "You used to love me," she said softly. "We used to talk about building something together. A life. A family." Jonathan laughed, cold and hollow. "I outgrew you, Scarlett. That's what you can't seem to understand. I built something. You just existed. Decorating our house and popping prenatal vitamins isn't contribution. It's charity." She blinked, stunned. "I gave up everything to support you." "No one asked you to," he snapped, now moving toward the hallway. "You did it because you didn't have anything else to offer." The silence that followed was dense, filled with every unsaid insult and buried resentment. He paused in the doorway of their once shared bedroom and looked back at her with a sneer. "You're not a wife anymore. You're a liability. Trash that came in a pretty box. I don't need you now." Scarlett didn't speak. She couldn't. She could barely breathe. Jonathan disappeared into the bedroom, returning moments later with a duffel bag and a Rolex watch he tossed into it like loose change. "I'll be staying at the Langham. Don't call. Don't show up. Don't embarrass yourself." And then he left. Just like that. The door clicked shut behind him, and the penthouse fell into an eerie stillness. Scarlett stood in the center of it, trembling, one hand clinging to the back of a chair for balance. The weight of her child pressed against her spine, reminding her she wasn't alone. She was devastated, humiliated, but something inside her stirred, something buried beneath years of compromise and silence. It wasn't rage. Not yet. It was the first breath of clarity. The city wore a gray coat of drizzle that afternoon. The sky had forgotten how to be blue, and the sidewalks shimmered with cold puddles reflecting the blur of people too busy to look up. Scarlet pulled her coat tighter around her, an old wool piece that no longer buttoned over her growing belly, and kept walking. She could have turned around. She had considered it more than once. But something stubborn in her kept her moving toward the art exhibition on the Upper East Side. It wasn't the kind of place she belonged anymore. Not without Jonathan. Not with swollen ankles and second-hand boots. Yet when her old college friend Ella had sent her a last-minute invite with a gentle, "You need to get out," she couldn't say no. So here she was alone, tired, unsure of herself. But here, the gallery was an oasis of light and stillness. Abstract paintings and sculptures filled the minimalist space, all stark whites and bold strokes of color. The air smelled faintly of citrus and varnish. Soft jazz played from somewhere overhead, a sharp contrast to the chaos inside her. She wandered quietly, trying not to draw attention. Her hands rested gently on her stomach, almost as if shielding her child from judgment. Elegant guests sipped champagne, spoke in hushed tones about brushwork and symbolism. Scarlet moved between them like a ghost, half present, half broken. It was a canvas of a woman standing at the edge of a storm that caught her eye. Painted in muted grays and pale yellows, the figure stood alone, hair wild in the wind, her back straight. There was something defiant about her posture, something familiar. "You see the resolve too, don't you?" The voice was low, steady, and masculine, close enough to startle her. Scarlet turned and found herself facing a man who didn't look like he belonged either. Not in a way that suggested poverty, but in a way that suggested power, had grown tired of performing. He wore a tailored navy coat, the collar turned slightly up, and he held his glass like he hadn't taken a sip in hours. His eyes, cool steel gray but kind, studied her without intruding. "I'm sorry," she said, unsure. "The painting," he replied, gesturing to the canvas. "Everyone else sees fear. I see resolve. Like she's about to walk into the storm, not away from it." Scarlet glanced back at the painting. Her lips parted, but the words got tangled somewhere in her throat. She felt suddenly seen in a way she hadn't in months. I think you're right," she murmured. He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "I'm Ethan, by the way. Ethan Blackwell." Her breath caught for a moment. She recognized the name. Blackwell Holdings. One of the few billionaires in the city whose money didn't come with scandal, or at least not the kind that leaked. "I'm Scarlet," she said softly. "Stone." Ethan raised an eyebrow slightly, but didn't press. "Pleasure to meet you, Scarlet Stone." There was a beat of silence. "You're not here for the art, are you?" he asked gently. She hesitated. Her instinct was to lie, say she was just browsing. But she was tired of pretending. "No," she said, surprising herself. "I needed to be anywhere else. Even if it meant standing in a room full of strangers with nothing to offer but borrowed courage." Ethan nodded slowly, then stepped slightly closer. Not too close, not imposing. That kind of courage is rarer than you think. Scarlet looked down, suddenly self-conscious. "I'm sorry. I'm pregnant, overwhelmed, and clearly oversharing." "I don't mind," he said. "In fact, I'd like to listen." She looked up at him, confused. "I'm not trying to fix you," he added. "But something tells me you've been silenced too long. And that bothers me." Something in his voice was solid. Grounded. Not pitying, not performative. Just steady. So she told him. Not everything. But enough. She told him about Jonathan. About the betrayal. The abandonment. The words she still heard every night like broken records. She didn't cry. Not once. But her hands trembled. Ethan listened, not interrupting. His gaze never wavered. When she finished, she felt lighter. Not healed, but no longer hollow. "I don't know what I'm going to do," she admitted. "I'm scared." He nodded. "Good. Fear keeps us human. But what you do next, that's where strength is forged." Scarlet gave him a small, almost shy smile. "You're not what I expected." "Neither are you," Ethan said. Then, after a pause, "If you want out, Scarlet, really out, I can help." She blinked. "Why?" "Because I don't believe people like Jonathan should win. And I think you deserve more than survival. You deserve to build." Scarlett stared at him, unsure if she should trust what he was offering. But for the first time in months, she felt a seed of possibility stirring in her chest. And that night, under the muted lights of an art gallery in the middle of the city, a door quietly opened in her life. One that Jonathan could no longer control. The first call came the next morning. Scarlett sat at her small kitchen table in the two-bedroom apartment she had moved into after leaving the penthouse. Nothing like the glass-walled luxury she'd once known, but it was hers. A chipped mug of tea sat untouched in front of her. The city moved outside the fogged window, uncaring and loud. Inside, the silence was dense. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, thumb hovering. Then answered. Scarlett Stone, a woman's voice asked, crisp and professional. Yes. My name is Maria Chung. I'm with Blackwell Legal Associates. Mr. Ethan Blackwell asked me to reach out. He said you're ready. Scarlett froze. Ready. The word echoed like a challenge. Yes. I think I am. Good. We'll begin preparing the initial filings for divorce. You don't need to worry about any of the financial logistics. Mr. Blackwell has authorized full support. We'll send a courier with documents this afternoon. He also requested that we arrange a private therapist and an OB/GYN of your choosing. Scarlett swallowed hard. That's very generous. Maria paused. He doesn't consider it charity. He considers it overdue justice. Scarlett ended the call with a strange cocktail of emotions swirling inside her. Gratitude, uncertainty, and the faintest pulse of empowerment. She wasn't a victim in a cage anymore. She was moving. She was choosing. 3 weeks passed in a blur of paperwork and firestorms. Jonathan didn't take it well. He didn't even pretend to be surprised when the divorce papers arrived at his firm. He laughed, arrogant and amused, until his legal team informed him that Scarlett wasn't just filing. She had legal muscle behind her. Powerful legal muscle. He had expected tears, begging, one final chance to watch her unravel. Instead, he found clean signatures and an air of detachment he couldn't understand. You really want to do this? He asked over a strained phone call one evening, his voice tight with disbelief. Scarlett's tone was calm. You already did. You'll walk away with nothing. No, she said, almost gently. I'm walking away with everything you tried to destroy and couldn't. He hung up on her. The next day, news broke on several blogs that Jonathan Stone was involved in a particularly nasty divorce. Speculation swirled. His image, a family man, a driven visionary, began to tarnish. A few board members pulled private meetings. Scarlett didn't watch the headlines. She stayed focused on her own reconstruction. Ethan kept his word, quietly and without fanfare. He never hovered. Never made her feel indebted. He introduced her to his advisors, asked her what she truly wanted, not just for herself, but for her child. For her life. I want to open a center, she confessed one evening over coffee in his minimalist office. For women like me, who get abandoned, humiliated, left with nothing while the world keeps praising their husbands. Ethan didn't flinch. He simply nodded. Good, he said. We'll start with a feasibility study. Then a business plan. I'll put up the seed capital. You run it. Make it real. Scarlett stared at him. Why are you doing this? Ethan leaned forward, eyes steady. Because people like Jonathan think power is cruelty. But real power, is the ability to rebuild. And that's what I see in you. The divorce finalized quietly. Scarlett didn't attend court. She didn't need to. Maria handled everything. Jonathan fought, of course. Not because he wanted her back, but because he hated losing. But every move he made was countered. Every petty tactic disarmed. He signed the final documents at 11:43 a.m. on a Monday. Alone. Furious. And Scarlett, sitting by the window of her new office space above a bakery in Soho, watched the sunrise with her hands resting over her child and a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. For the first time in years, she felt free. Not lost. Not small. Free. The old Scarlett would have hesitated before stepping into a boardroom. She would have checked the mirror twice, second-guessed her thoughts, and waited for someone else to lead the way. But that Scarlet was gone. Now she adjusted the strap on her heels, ran a hand over her baby bump in silent reassurance, and pushed open the glass doors of the downtown co-working space like she belonged there. Because she did. The space Ethan secured for her wasn't lavish, but it buzzed with potential. Exposed brick walls, tall windows that let in swaths of afternoon sun, and a long oak table where her small team was already setting up laptops, mood boards, and coffee. Scarlet had personally interviewed every woman on her team. Most of them mothers, some survivors of similar pain, all of them dreamers. The project was no longer just an idea. It had a name, Scarlet Haven. A haven for women. For mothers. For anyone clawing their way out of the wreckage of a relationship, a reputation, or a past someone else tried to bury them under. Ethan came by occasionally, always respectful, always brief. He never spoke to her in a way that made her feel helped. He asked questions, listened to her ideas, and when she doubted herself, reminded her what she'd already survived. One evening, as the team packed up and left, Ethan lingered. "Did I ever thank you?" she asked quietly, standing at the window with the city lights flickering below. He raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For seeing me when I felt invisible." "You didn't need me to see you," he said. "You just needed a mirror that wasn't cracked." Scarlet looked at him, touched in a place too deep to name. "Still, thank you." Ethan nodded, then smiled. "Now thank yourself. You're the one who's doing the building." Weeks became months. Scarlet took business courses online, late at night with swollen ankles propped on pillows. She met with city health officials, investors Ethan introduced her to, and medical professionals who would become the backbone of the center's programs. There were days she wanted to collapse. Days she missed the ease of being a kept woman, of letting someone else decide everything. But then she'd remember the penthouse silence, the cruelty in Jonathan's voice, the way she had once folded herself into a smaller version to fit into someone else's success. Not anymore. The moment that changed everything came in the form of a speech. A last-minute invitation arrived, a panel on maternal health equity and entrepreneurial resilience. A speaker had dropped out. Would Scarlet Stone, founder of Scarlet Haven, be willing to take their place? Her hands shook as she read it. She almost said no. Then she thought about the women who'd been discarded, who were sitting at home right now, broken, unseen, unheard. She stood before a room of CEOs, policymakers, and medical leaders 2 weeks later. 8 months pregnant, radiant in a tailored navy dress, her voice steady and sure. "I used to believe strength meant endurance," she began. "Staying quiet, smiling through the pain. But I've learned that real strength is choosing yourself after someone else decides you're no longer worth choosing." There was silence. Then applause. Afterward, reporters asked questions. Cameras flashed. People Googled her name. Not because she was Jonathan's ex, but because she had something to say. She wasn't a forgotten wife. She wasn't a discarded burden. She wasn't a symbol of someone else's fall. She was Scarlet. Again. And for the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt like she was living. The invitation arrived on ivory cardstock, sealed in gold wax and scripted in calligraphy. The Bright Futures Annual Gala, an event where wealth paraded itself and reputations were stitched together with applause and champagne. Scarlet stared at the invitation in her hand, her fingers brushing over her name. It was the same event Jonathan had once called the throne room of the city's elite. The same event where he had planned to flaunt Cassandra, the mistress he had replaced her with. The same event he had once told her she'd never be welcome at again. How poetic, she thought, as she set the invitation down and looked over at the man sitting across the table. Ethan Blackwell. Composed as ever, dark suit jacket tossed over his chair, sleeves rolled up, a pen in one hand and a spreadsheet in the other. "Do I go?" she asked quietly. He looked up. "Only if you want to." "I don't want to go to be seen," she said. "I want to go to be remembered." Ethan smiled, not with amusement, but with quiet pride. "Then I'll be honored to escort you." The night of the gala was a masterpiece of elegance. The Crystal Renaissance Hotel glowed like a jewel against the night sky. Valets in white gloves, orchestras behind velvet curtains, a red carpet unfurled beneath the city's elite. Inside, guests buzzed like bees in a chandelier-lit hive. Champagne flutes clinked, laughter echoed, and cameras swept across the ballroom. Jonathan stood at the center of it all. Dressed in a midnight blue tuxedo, Cassandra on his arm in a plunging silver gown, he looked every bit the billionaire power player. His smile was smooth, his laughter sharp. "This year's keynote speaker will be me," he joked to a group of investors, sipping from a crystal glass. Why let humility get in the way of truth? The crowd chuckled. But then everything stopped. The doors opened. Heads turned. Conversations trailed off like broken strings of music. She entered. Scarlett, 8 months pregnant, wrapped in a flowing black satin gown with a silver neckline that glimmered like starlight. Her hair was swept up, her posture regal, her gaze serene. On her arm was Ethan Blackwell, whose mere presence rearranged the energy in the room. Gasps. Whispers. Eyes widened, recognizing not only Ethan, but the woman beside him, the woman who had once been cast out like a forgotten relic. But she wasn't forgotten now. Every head turned. Cameras found her. Phones lifted discreetly. Scarlett walked slowly, each step deliberate. Not flaunting. Not performing. Claiming. Jonathan's glass froze halfway to his lips. His smile collapsed. Cassandra shifted uneasily beside him, tugging at her dress as murmurs swept the room like wildfire. "Is that? Wait, she's with Blackwell? She looks incredible." Jonathan finally moved, storming across the room, face flushed. "What the hell is this?" he hissed when he reached them. Scarlett turned to him, calm. "It's called a return." Ethan said nothing. He didn't need to. Jonathan's eyes flicked to Ethan, then back to Scarlett. "You don't belong here." She leaned in slightly. "You said that last time. But here I am. And this time, I didn't come alone." Her words were soft, deadly, and final. Jonathan clenched his jaw, his composure cracking like thin ice. The cameras nearby caught everything. When Scarlett and Ethan walked away, the crowd parted. Respectfully. Awed. Cassandra followed him back to their table in silence, her grip on his arm looser than before. By the end of the night, investors who had once fawned over Jonathan were whispering behind his back. The board chairman of his company politely excused himself mid-conversation and later handed his business card to Ethan. Cassandra said nothing the entire ride home. The next morning, she left without saying goodbye. Scarlett didn't need to gloat. She didn't need revenge. The gala had done that for her. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand anything. She simply arrived. In her truth. In her strength. In her rebirth. And the world took notice. The morning after the gala, the media was merciless. Billionaire Jonathan Stone snubbed by pregnant ex-wife and CEO Ethan Blackwell in shocking gala appearance. Power shift. Scarlett Stone's triumphant return turns heads at Bright Futures Gala. From mistress to mess, Jonathan's PR nightmare begins. Jonathan sat alone at the head of a long mahogany conference table in his company's 40th floor boardroom, the headlines glowing back at him from the oversized screen on the wall. His assistants shuffled around nervously. His publicist, a woman who had long stopped pretending to like him, read the statements with clipped efficiency. "They're calling it poetic justice," she said flatly. "Some are speculating about insider investor losses. Scarlett's partnership with Blackwell is trending. We have 4 sponsorships pulling out of the next quarter's campaign. And Cassandra," Jonathan stiffened, "has made a statement. To Vanity Street. It's being picked up everywhere." He didn't ask what the statement was. He didn't need to. He'd seen the look in Cassandra's eyes the night before. The one that said, "You've lost more than just control. You've lost relevance." His jaw locked as the door opened, and one of his most prominent board members entered, eyes steely. "We need to talk." Meanwhile, Scarlett sat at a sunlit cafe across town with a notebook open and a pen poised between her fingers. She wasn't reading the news. She didn't need to. The real victories weren't written in headlines. They were in the emails pouring into her Scarlet Haven inbox from women around the country. Women who were thanking her. Women who were asking how to start over. Women who had found hope just by seeing her stand tall in that ballroom. She had become something more than a symbol. She had become proof. Proof that you could be discarded and still rebuild. That you could be called trash and still become treasure. That you could lose everything and find yourself in the rubble. Across the table, Ethan stirred his espresso. "You know what they'll say next," he murmured. She looked up. "That you're only here because I funded you." She smiled faintly. "Then let them come see what I've built." Ethan leaned back in his chair, impressed, not for the first time. "You're not afraid anymore, are you?" Scarlett shook her head slowly. "I was never afraid of failing. I was afraid of being nothing. But now I know, I was never nothing. I was just in the wrong hands." Back in Jonathan's world, cracks widened. His company's stock dipped subtly at first, then with sharper teeth. Investors began asking questions, not just about his performance, but about his judgment. His name had once meant aggressive growth. Now it hinted at personal scandal and instability. Worse, Cassandra's interview had confirmed everything the public suspected. He treated people like objects. He wanted to own power, not earn it. "I stayed too long. I'm not proud of that." She ended with a cryptic quote. "The woman he left behind is the woman who surpassed him. I admire her more than I ever admired him." The internet erupted. So did Jonathan. He trashed his office that night. Smashed a crystal decanter, shouted at 2 assistants, fired one of his interns for breathing too loudly. But no tantrum could reverse the public tide. He was no longer the story. Scarlett was. At a private networking dinner hosted by an influential VC firm, Scarlett's name was on the guest list. Not as a guest plus one, but as a speaker. Jonathan's wasn't on the list at all. In the quiet of his penthouse, the same walls that once made him feel like a king now felt like prison bars. The silence pressed in harder than ever. He watched a video clip of Scarlett's speech from the gala on his phone. The glow in her eyes. The effortless grace. The way people listened. He whispered the words out loud, almost to himself. "You're not a wife anymore. You're a liability. Trash in a pretty box." They echoed like a curse. He dropped the phone. And in that moment, Jonathan Stone, billionaire, empire builder, image chaser, finally understood. He hadn't just lost Scarlett. He had never deserved her. The rain came heavy that night. Sheets of water drumming against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Jonathan's penthouse. The glass streaked with the blur of city lights twisted by storm. He sat in the dark, wrapped in the silence he used to enjoy. Once it had symbolized control, peace, solitude. Now it felt like a vacuum, every corner of the space haunted by absence. Scarlett's laughter. The soft rustle of her feet on the hardwood. The way she used to hum to herself when arranging fresh flowers, even after sleepless nights. All gone. The untouched scotch in his hand trembled slightly as he scrolled through his phone. Another article. Another photo. Scarlett, radiant, standing beside a row of women outside the newly opened Scarlet Haven Center. The caption read, "From abandoned to unstoppable. Scarlett Stone launches NYC's first women's reinvention center for survivors of financial and emotional abandonment." There she was, smiling, not just posing. Really smiling. Not for him. Not for anyone else. For herself. He scrolled deeper. Pictures from the gala. Headlines. Public praise. Investor interviews. One of his former board members, now serving on Scarlett's advisory council. Another email from his PR firm marked urgent. More sponsors pulling out. Stockholders asking to reevaluate leadership. He didn't even open it. He just leaned back in the leather chair he once declared was throne-worthy, the irony now suffocating, and stared at his reflection in the black glass. What stared back was not a king. It was a man unraveling. For years, he believed fear kept people loyal. Money kept them tethered. Image kept them protected. But Scarlett had destroyed that illusion. She had walked away with nothing and made everything from it. And he He had walked away with everything and ended up with nothing. Even Cassandra, who once clung to him like a lifeline, was gone. Not even a note. Just an empty closet and a leaked story that painted him as an insecure fraud hiding behind his fortune. He had built his empire like a fortress. Now every wall echoed. The next morning, he received a single, unassuming envelope in the mail. Inside was an embossed invitation. It read, Scarlet Haven Gala, Inaugural Celebration, honoring women who rebuild from ruins. The handwriting at the bottom was hers. Not angry, not sarcastic. Simply, you always said I was good at throwing parties. Thought I'd invite you to one of mine. He laughed, bitter, breathless. He didn't know what stung more, that she had sent it, or that she had no intention of letting him matter ever again. Later that night, alone again, he opened an old photo album from their early days. A smiling Scarlet in a yellow sundress. The day they signed the lease on their first apartment. Her surprise birthday cake. A picture he took of her sleeping, hand on her belly, peaceful. He closed the album, eyes wet. Not because she left, because he made it easy for her to go. And because now he realized too late, she had never been his weakness. She had always been his strength. The gala hall pulsed with quiet elegance. Cream-colored drapery swept from gold-trimmed ceilings. Chandeliers flickered like stars, and the room was filled not with titans of industry, but with women. Strong, radiant, battle-worn, and rising. Each one had survived something: abandonment, betrayal, silence, shame. And now they stood together, their presence a silent rebellion against every voice that had told them they were not enough. At the center of it all stood Scarlet. No longer hidden. No longer carrying pain like a second skin. She was dressed in deep crimson satin. Fitting for a woman who had once been shamed for her name and now wore it like a crown. Her child, now several months old, slept peacefully in the arms of a close friend nearby. Her team buzzed with pride around the periphery, greeting guests, donors, survivors, and allies. Among them were city officials, healthcare leaders, therapists, and builders. People who had seen what Scarlet created and believed in it. Ethan stood at the bar, watching her with quiet admiration, sipping sparkling water instead of wine. He had never tried to claim her. He had simply walked beside her. And now he watched the woman she had become, untouchable, unshakable, undeniable. When Scarlet took the stage, the room fell into reverent silence. No music. No flash. Just her, standing at the center with the soft click of her heels and the full attention of every soul in the room. She looked around, then down briefly at the notes in her hand, then folded them and placed them aside. She didn't need them. Her voice was clear. Strong. Steady. When I was left alone, I thought I'd never recover. I thought being discarded made me worthless. But worth isn't determined by who walks away. It's revealed by how we rise once they do. I was told I was trash. I was told I was a burden. That I'd never survive without the man who abandoned me. But I did. A few heads nodded. A few wiped tears. Scarlet Haven isn't just a building. It's a declaration that women do not have to be defined by their worst day or by the ones who walked away on theirs. We are not what was done to us. We are what we build from it. Applause erupted, but she lifted a hand gently. There was more. I don't stand here as a victim of a broken marriage. I stand here as the architect of a new future. Not just for me. For all of us. For every woman who has been told she's too loud, too soft, too much, too tired, too broken. You're not broken. You are becoming. This time, the applause couldn't be held back. The crowd rose to their feet. Not in pity. Not in polite encouragement. In awe. Ethan clapped with the rest of them, but he knew what no one else did. Scarlet's rise wasn't just a win for her. It was a crack in the system that had silenced women for centuries. Jonathan never attended, but he saw the speech. He watched it alone at his kitchen counter, in a penthouse that now felt like a tomb. The camera caught Scarlet mid-smile, holding her child after the event, surrounded by women who looked at her like a hero. He didn't cry. He didn't throw his glass. He just sat there, quiet. Because regret doesn't always come in fire. Sometimes it settles in like cold ash. Heavy. Permanent. And Scarlett? She didn't think of him anymore. Months later, Scarlett walked through the sunlit hallways of Scarlet Haven, greeting staff and new residents. The center was growing, plans underway to open locations in 3 more cities. A book in the works. A podcast. A scholarship fund. But most importantly, a legacy. Her child cooed softly in her arms as she walked past a mural painted by a resident artist. A phoenix rising from ash. Beneath it, a quote etched into the wall. She remembered who she was, and the game changed. Scarlett smiled. She didn't just remember who she was. She became everything she was always meant to be. We have come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories. On Christmas Eve, in a house Josephine had spent years keeping alive, her father slammed his knife onto the table, called her a burden, and threw her out into the freezing night. They thought she'd crawl back. They thought she needed them. Instead, Josephine packed her bags, cut every lifeline they had taken for granted, and watched, silent and unflinching, as their world unraveled without her. Hello family, welcome to True Life Stories. Please subscribe and leave a like for us, it means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The heater buzzed weakly against the biting December cold, a tired warrior fighting a losing battle. In the small, aging house on the outskirts of Ohio, Josephine sat hunched over the kitchen table, her fingers stiff from a day's work and the creeping chill that the walls couldn't keep out. The house smelled faintly of burnt coffee and something metallic, like the worn copper pipes groaning through the walls. She rubbed her hands together, blowing on them for warmth, and pulled her thin cardigan tighter around her shoulders. Across the room, the Christmas tree stood awkwardly in the corner, a hand-me-down from a better time, its ornaments mismatched and tired. Strands of blinking lights, several bulbs burned out, gave it a sputtering, half-hearted glow. Josephine's mother, Daniela, was busy in the kitchen, slamming pans and muttering under her breath. It was supposed to be Christmas Eve, a time for warmth, laughter, and family. Instead, there was only the clatter of dishes and a heavy, stifling silence that pressed down harder than the winter air outside. Josephine glanced at the clock on the microwave. 6:42 p.m. Another long shift at the insurance office had come and gone, a monotonous churn of claims, paperwork, and desperate voices asking for miracles she could never give. Her salary wasn't much, barely scraping past the threshold of survival, but she made it stretch. It had to stretch. Electricity, water, internet, groceries. All filtered through her dwindling account like sand through cracked fingers. Without her, the heater would have fallen silent last winter. Without her, the tap water would run dry, the lights would sputter into darkness, the fridge would stand empty. Josephine didn't complain. She didn't expect gratitude. In some distant corner of her heart, she convinced herself that this was what family did. Pick up the weight where it grew too heavy. But lately the weight didn't feel shared. It felt dumped on her, without acknowledgement, without even a glance. She caught her reflection in the window, pale, tired, far older than 24, and wondered when she had become a ghost in her own life. From the living room, she heard the drone of the television. Some sports game her father half-watched, glass of wine in hand, feet propped carelessly on the stained ottoman. Harold had been different once, proud, energetic, funny even. But the layoff 3 years ago had withered him into something bitter and sharp-edged. He didn't look for work anymore. He didn't look for anything anymore. Her brother Nathan, 17 and still clinging to the scraps of his boyhood, was upstairs playing video games, lost in worlds far kinder than this one. Josephine shifted in her seat, glancing at the stack of bills she had tucked beneath a placemat. Due dates circled in red ink. Overdraft warnings. Final notices. She thought about her next paycheck, already rationed into tiny, careful pieces. Rent for this crumbling shelter, groceries to keep the fridge humming, Wi-Fi so her brother could do his schoolwork. A soft thud made her look up. Daniela set a plate of ham onto the table, its aroma warm but strangely hollow. "Dinner," she muttered, wiping her hands on a towel. No one smiled. No one thanked her. They simply drifted toward the table, creatures of habit more than family. Josephine picked up her fork and tried to summon an appetite. She smiled at Nathan when he appeared, hair tousled, a faint hopeful glint in his eyes. But before she could say anything, Harold plopped down at the head of the table and poured another glass of cheap wine, his eyes glassy and unfocused. The radio on the counter crackled out a faint, off-key Christmas carol. Silent night, holy night. The irony wasn't lost on Josephine. Forks scraped plates. Someone coughed. Someone dropped a knife. No one really spoke. The air was thick with something unnameable, resentment, perhaps, or regret. Josephine swallowed a lump in her throat along with her first bite. She pushed mashed potatoes around her plate, mind half drifting to tomorrow's shift, the errands she needed to run, the paycheck already spent in her mind. Always calculating. Always planning. Always carrying. And still invisible. If she disappeared tomorrow, she wondered, would they even notice? The thought lingered, heavy, dangerous, as Harold set his wine glass down with a sharp clink and cleared his throat. Josephine looked up, sensing something shift, something raw and ugly rising to the surface. And in that moment, just before the words that would unravel everything, she realized something bone-deep and terrible. She had always been seen as the burden, never the lifeline. The sound was sharp enough to make Josephine jump. Harold's knife slammed onto the tabletop, rattling the silverware and sending a hollow echo bouncing off the cracked plaster walls. Nathan froze mid-bite, his fork suspended in the air, a tiny piece of chicken dangling from its tines. Daniela flinched but quickly masked it with a forced laugh, brittle, desperate, the kind of sound people make when they pretend everything is fine. Josephine set her own fork down slowly, pulse thudding in her ears. Her father's gaze pinned her where she sat, cold, unblinking, merciless. There was no mistaking it this time. No mistaking the disdain that had curdled in his expression. His voice came low and deliberate, slicing through the heavy air like a blade. "You're a burden," Harold said. The words didn't quite land at first, as if the room itself resisted letting them in. Josephine stared at him, waiting for the punchline, for the sheepish chuckle that would follow. But none came. Only the faint crackle of the old radio and the distant whine of wind against the windows. "You can't live here anymore." For a moment, the world tipped sideways. Josephine blinked, feeling as though she had stepped through the surface of a frozen pond, crashing into icy disbelief. Daniela opened her mouth, perhaps to protest, but only a thin, nervous sound escaped, a cough, a gasp, something between shame and surrender. Her hands fluttered uselessly around the edges of the tablecloth, smoothing invisible wrinkles. Josephine's own voice felt lodged somewhere deep inside her chest. When she finally found it, it came out hoarse and hollow. "What did you just say?" she asked, her voice barely louder than a whisper. "You heard me," Harold snapped, his hand tightening around his wine glass until the cheap crystal creaked ominously. "This is my house, and I'm saying enough is enough. You need to move out. Move out." As if she were some unwelcome guest. As if she hadn't been the one keeping this house alive while he drowned in self-pity and stale alcohol. Josephine clenched her hands under the table, nails biting into her palms. She could feel Nathan's wide, horrified stare drilling into her from across the table. A part of her wanted to shield him from this, to pretend it was a misunderstanding, some cruel Christmas Eve joke spun out of Harold's bitterness. But deep down, she knew. She had always known. They didn't see her. They saw what they needed. A bank account with a beating heart, a mule that carried their pride while they pretended they were doing fine. "I stayed," Josephine said, voice shaking with a fury that scared even her. "Because you needed me. You couldn't pay the bills. You couldn't even keep the heat running last year without my help." Harold leaned back in his chair, his face twisting into something sour and tired. "You think that makes you special?" he said. "You think that gives you the right to throw it in our faces?" "No," Josephine said softly. "I never threw anything in your face. I kept quiet. I thought I was helping." "You were," Daniela said hurriedly, her voice thin and pleading. "You are. We appreciate it, Josephine. It's just, your father is under a lot of stress." "Don't," Josephine interrupted, her voice sharpening. She turned to her mother, searching for some shred of alliance, some acknowledgement. Daniela only looked away, unable, or unwilling, to meet her eyes. Nathan dropped his fork with a loud clatter, the sound startling in the dead silence. He looked like he wanted to say something, anything, but words tangled in his throat, and he dropped his gaze to his plate instead. The realization struck Josephine harder than the words themselves. She was alone at this table. Harold pushed his plate away with a grunt. "You have a job. You're old enough. Time to stop leeching off your parents and grow up." Leeching. The word hit her like a slap. Josephine stood up so suddenly her chair scraped harshly against the floorboards. The table, the blinking lights, the greasy hem cooling on the plates. All of it blurred together as she grabbed her coat from the back of the chair. No one moved to stop her. Not Harold, who refilled his glass without a second glance. Not Daniela, who wrung her hands and stared at the floor. Not Nathan, who sat frozen, lips pressed into a thin, miserable line. Josephine pulled her coat tight around her, the old zipper catching on the worn fabric. She stumbled for the door, heart hammering wildly against her ribs. As her fingers fumbled with the knob, she paused just long enough to cast one last look over her shoulder. Her father already had his back turned. Her mother sagged in her chair, defeated. Her brother, sweet, innocent Nathan, met her gaze, silently begging her not to go. But Josephine knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that staying would be a slow death. She opened the door. A blast of frigid air swept into the room, setting the Christmas lights shivering in their sockets. No one spoke. No one called her back. She stepped out into the cold, the door clicking shut behind her with a finality that echoed down the empty street. And just like that, Josephine was no longer a daughter, a sister, or a lifeline. She was something else now. Something raw and dangerous. Something free. The streetlights cast pale halos across the cracked pavement as Josephine trudged up the driveway, the rubber soles of her boots crunching through the thin, dirty crust of snow. The house loomed behind her, the porch light flickering, a tired eye reluctant to close. Her breath came in ragged clouds, more from the churning inside her chest than the cold night air. She didn't cry. Not here. Not yet. Her fingers, stiff and raw, fumbled with the keys. The old brass one stuck stubbornly in the lock, as if even the house itself didn't want to let her back inside. Josephine shoved the door open with a grunt, the hinges squealing in protest. The house was silent, almost unnervingly so. Upstairs, she could hear the faint, muted blast of Nathan's video game, but no footsteps greeted her return. No voices called out. It was as though she had already been erased. She closed the door quietly behind her, leaning her back against it for a moment. The familiar scent of the place, a mixture of old wood, damp winter air, and the faint burnt smell from the heating vents, wrapped around her like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The kitchen light buzzed overhead, casting long, lonely shadows across the cluttered countertops. Half-eaten plates from dinner still sat abandoned on the table, forgotten the moment she walked out. Josephine stared at the scene for a moment, the remnants of a family meal that had broken something inside her forever, and then turned away. There was no ceremony to it, no dramatic announcement. She simply moved. In her bedroom, a small, cramped space off the hallway, barely big enough for a twin bed and a battered dresser. Josephine grabbed the first suitcase she could find, a faded maroon one with a broken zipper tab. It still had a sticker from a middle school field trip peeling off the side. She laid it open on the bed and began to pack. Sweaters, jeans, socks, a few battered paperbacks. She moved mechanically, folding and stacking, as though if she kept her hands busy enough, her mind wouldn't catch up. Each item she touched was steeped in memory. The threadbare blue hoodie from college, still smelling faintly of vanilla. The Polaroid photo tucked between the pages of her old sketchbook, her and Nathan at the county fair, sticky with cotton candy and grinning. A chipped ceramic mug that her mother had once given her, long before the walls between them hardened. Josephine paused, mug in hand, thumb brushing the faded inscription. "You are stronger than you know." A bitter laugh bubbled up in her throat. Stronger? Maybe. Or maybe just foolish enough to think love could outrun resentment. She set the mug down carefully, almost tenderly, and zipped up the suitcase. It took her less than an hour to dismantle the life she had built here. The little island she had tried to carve out for herself inside a house that only ever wanted to swallow her whole. She filled 2 suitcases and a single battered duffel bag. That was it. 24 years boiled down to 3 pieces of luggage and a hollow ache between her ribs. Before she left, she scribbled a note, if only out of politeness or perhaps stubborn pride, and taped it to the fridge door. Leaving tonight. Good luck. No anger. No accusation. Just the facts. She pulled on her coat, slung her bags over her shoulders, and took one last look around the tiny, dim bedroom. The posters peeling from the walls. The cracked mirror leaning against the dresser. The faded ribbon from her high school graduation, still pinned to the corner of her bulletin board. None of it would be coming with her. None of it belonged anymore. Downstairs, she moved like a ghost, silent and unseen. She hesitated at the front door, the cold air leaking in through the cracks already nipping at her cheeks. Part of her, the broken, desperate part, wanted someone to come running, to stop her, to say they were sorry, to beg her to stay. But no footsteps pounded down the stairs. No desperate apologies filled the air. The house remained still, indifferent, like it always had been. Josephine squared her shoulders and opened the door. The night hit her full force, bitter, raw, honest. Her boots crunched the snow again as she walked toward her car, the taillights of a few neighbors' vehicles blinking lazily in the distance. She tossed her bags into the back seat and slid behind the wheel, the cracked leather seat cold and unforgiving against her thighs. The engine coughed to life with a groan. For a moment, she sat there, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the sagging outline of the house she had called home. She didn't feel sadness. Not really. What she felt was heavier, more permanent, an ending, not a temporary rift, not a fight to be patched up later. A severing. Josephine shifted the car into drive and pulled away from the curb, tires crunching against ice and gravel. She didn't look back. Behind her, the Christmas lights flickered in the front window, a weak, sputtering heartbeat trying to fake life. Ahead of her, the road stretched long and black and empty. And for the first time in years, Josephine understood. She wasn't running away. She was running toward something. Something better. Something hers. The apartment smelled faintly of fresh paint and cleaning solution. A smell Josephine quickly grew to love. It was a modest place, tucked above a hardware store on the edge of downtown. 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen with yellowed linoleum floors, a cramped bathroom with a chipped sink, and a living room just big enough to fit a couch and a secondhand TV if she ever bought one. But it was hers. The key, a simple, unremarkable brass thing, felt heavier than anything she had ever carried. It jingled softly between her fingers as she pushed open the front door for the first time, her breath clouding in the chilly, empty air. Inside, it was cold and dim, the radiator hissing softly in the corner like a half-tamed cat. The windows were bare, letting in long shafts of weak winter sunlight that pooled on the battered hardwood floors. Dust motes floated lazily in the beams of light, dancing to a rhythm only they could hear. Josephine set her bags down in the middle of the living room with a hollow thud. The noise echoed off the empty walls, making the space feel even larger than it was. For a long moment, she just stood there, arms wrapped tightly around herself, as if she needed to physically hold herself together. She was free. She was alone. The realization settled over her like a heavy, strange cloak. Freedom wasn't triumphant, the way she'd always imagined it. It was raw. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. Slowly, she crossed the room, her boots leaving faint damp marks on the floor from the melting snow. She peered into the tiny kitchen, a single counter, 2 squeaky cabinets, a miniature. stove that looked like it had seen better decades. She opened the fridge to find nothing but a small, flickering light bulb and a blast of cold air. No food. No furniture. No TV blaring sports games from the living room. No sighs of frustration from Daniela. No heavy, bitter silence from Harold. No Nathan's laugh drifting down the stairs. Just space. Empty and waiting. Josephine smiled. It was the kind of smile that started small, tight at the corners of her mouth, but grew until it pushed warmth all the way into her chest. She didn't unpack right away. Instead, she slipped her coat off and sat down cross-legged in the center of the floor, the wood hard and cool beneath her. She closed her eyes and leaned her head back, breathing in the quiet like it was something she could wear on her skin. No one was waiting to tell her she was a burden here. No one was going to slam a knife onto the table and demand she leave. No one would look past her, through her, like she was something disposable. Here, she was enough. The radiator gurgled and spat, sending a clumsy wave of warmth into the room. Josephine laughed under her breath. A real laugh, not the brittle, polite ones she had perfected over the years. It echoed back at her from the empty walls, filling the space with something new. Something alive. Later, after a trip to the grocery store where she bought only what she liked, sharp cheddar, fresh bread, a box of Earl Grey tea, she sat on the floor again, unwrapping a sandwich with frozen fingers. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, every moment of solitude. This was independence, she realized. Not some gleaming movie montage of success, but this quiet resilience. A cheap sandwich on a dusty floor. A silent apartment and a stubborn radiator. An aching loneliness that didn't break her, but rebuilt her piece by piece. Still, the transition wasn't without its price. The next morning, she woke up curled on a pile of jackets, her neck stiff, her back sore. She showered in freezing water because the old pipes hadn't caught up yet. She dressed in layers against the cold and drove her aging car, heater broken, windshield cracked, to work through a maze of icy streets. At the insurance office, her coworkers laughed and gossiped about their holiday plans, about family dinners and surprise proposals under Christmas lights. Josephine kept her head down, answering calls, filing claims, and listening to the hollow hum of her headset. When lunchtime came, she sat alone in the break room, stirring lukewarm soup from a thermos she had hastily packed. She scrolled through her phone out of habit, only to find no new messages. No missed calls. She wasn't missed. She wasn't needed. And strangely, that knowledge burned less than she thought it would. Josephine turned her phone face down on the table and took another sip of soup, savoring the salty, familiar taste. She didn't need anyone's permission to exist anymore. In the evenings, she returned to her empty apartment, layering socks against the cold, brewing tea on her tiny stove, curling up beneath a pile of blankets with borrowed library books. Every creak of the floorboards, every pop of the radiator, every low howl of the winter wind outside became familiar music. The loneliness no longer frightened her. It became a companion, a reminder that she could survive her own silence. Some nights she missed Nathan, the way he used to peek into her room with sheepish questions about school or life. She wondered how he was managing back at the house, how much he knew, how much he blamed her. She wondered if Daniela ever looked at the empty seat at the table and thought of her daughter, the one who paid the bills, fixed the broken heater, bought the groceries when there was no paycheck. But Josephine never reached out. Not once. They had made their choice. Now she was making hers. Freedom came with a price: loneliness, exhaustion, uncertainty. But captivity had come with its own: resentment, invisibility, pain. Given the choice, she would pay the cost of freedom 1,000 times over. Josephine pulled the threadbare blanket tighter around her shoulders, sipped her tea, and smiled into the flickering candlelight. She was here. She was standing. And she was just getting started. The decision came slowly, like water freezing across the surface of a pond. A creeping, inevitable solidification of something Josephine could no longer ignore. At first, she hadn't thought about them much. She hadn't wanted to. But each time she pulled into the grocery store parking lot, carefully counting the dollars in her wallet. She remembered how much she had stretched herself thin to keep that old house breathing. Each time she turned on her lights without a second thought, she remembered the endless notices she used to intercept from the mailbox, hidden away so Harold wouldn't erupt. Freedom tasted better than she had ever imagined, and yet the bitterness of betrayal still clung to the edges. One evening, after a long day of back-to-back calls at the office, Josephine sat at her tiny kitchen table with her laptop open in front of her. She sipped cold coffee from a chipped mug and stared at her email inbox, cluttered, mostly junk, bills, and confirmation receipts. And then she saw it. Final notice. Water utility account. The subject line hit her like a jab to the ribs. At first, panic flared, the automatic instinct to fix it, to scrape together funds, to shoulder the responsibility. But then she remembered. This wasn't her bill anymore. It never should have been. Still, the account had been in her name for years. They had asked her to set it up when Harold's credit score cratered after the layoff. It was easier that way, they said. It was just temporary. Temporary had stretched into permanence. Josephine stared at the notice for a long time, the cursor blinking impatiently in the corner of the screen. Her fingers hovered over the mouse. She didn't know them her name anymore. She didn't know them the warmth of their showers, the hum of their lights, the click of the modem that let Nathan disappear into his games. She didn't know them anything. The anger, when it came, wasn't hot. It was cold, calm, icy in a way that left no room for doubt. Josephine logged into the utility portal, the password still memorized like a bitter nursery rhyme, and pulled up the account settings. Her name, her address, her signature on every bill. Without hesitation, she clicked Terminate Service. A confirmation window popped up. Are you sure? This action cannot be undone. She clicked Yes. One bill down. She moved methodically, her mind sharpening with each keystroke. The electric account came next. Same process. Same memory. Her sitting in the freezing living room 2 winters ago, shivering under 3 layers of sweaters, writing checks to keep the lights on while Harold napped in his chair with a half-empty bottle on the floor beside him. Terminate service. Yes. The internet account was trickier. She remembered Harold screaming one summer when it had been briefly shut off due to non-payment. Nathan had nearly cried. Daniela had sighed and blamed the provider. Josephine had quietly paid the late fee. Now, with 3 quick clicks, she shut it down. The website spat out cheerful messages. We're sorry to see you go. Would you like to tell us why you're canceling? She didn't bother responding. She closed the laptop with a soft snap and leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. It was done. For the first time in years, Josephine had severed every invisible thread tying her to that house, that life. It wasn't revenge, not really. It wasn't some childish tantrum or petty cruelty. It was balance. It was correction. It was justice. For years they had taken from her, her money, her labor, her love, without thanks, without acknowledgement, without even basic respect. They had cast her out without hesitation. Let them now face what it meant to stand on their own. She imagined Harold flipping a light switch and nothing happening. Imagined Daniela twisting the faucet handle and finding only a sad, hollow groan of air. Imagine Nathan pounding on the old router, confused as the internet blinked out mid-game. Josephine wasn't cruel enough to feel giddy about it, but she wasn't saintly enough to feel guilty either. She stood, stretching the stiffness from her shoulders, and padded barefoot across the cold floor to the window. Outside, the streetlights burned against the purple dusk. Snow had begun to fall again, soft, silent flakes spiraling through the air like feathers. The world didn't stop spinning just because someone had been hurt. The world moved on. And so would she. Josephine wrapped herself tighter in her worn sweater and smiled, small, sure, steady. Let them figure it out. She had already built her own life from ashes. It was their turn now. It didn't happen all at once. No, the downfall crept in slowly, like rot beneath floorboards, invisible at first, but inevitable, unstoppable. The first sign was the darkened windows. A week after Josephine pulled the plug, as she drove through town on an errand, she passed by the old neighborhood. She hadn't meant to. It was instinct, a familiar left turn, a shortcut she once knew by heart. There it was. The house she had poured years of her life into. The sagging roofline. The rusted mailbox still tilting sideways. The wreath Daniela had hung crookedly on the front door after Thanksgiving, now listing pathetically against the wind. The windows were dark. No glow of lights behind the curtains. No blue flicker of the television that Harold used to fall asleep to. Just cold, black glass staring blankly out at the world. Josephine slowed the car without meaning to, hands tightening on the steering wheel. Had they noticed yet? Had they realized what she had done? She didn't linger. She pressed on, heart pounding, leaving the house shrinking in her rearview mirror like a bad dream. The second sign came a few days later. On a bitter Thursday morning, her phone buzzed with a string of missed calls and voicemails. Josephine stared at the notifications, sipping burnt coffee from a styrofoam cup in the office break room. Mom, 3 missed calls. Mom voicemail 112. Dad voicemail 045. The tightness in her chest returned, old instincts flaring. Answer, fix, apologize, sacrifice. But she crushed them down. She placed the phone face down on the table, letting it vibrate silently against the cheap laminate surface. If it was truly urgent, they would find another way. They had managed to throw her out. Surely they could manage to survive. Later, curiosity won out. She listened to the voicemails, each one a little more frantic than the last. Daniela's voice crackled first, falsely sweet, edged with panic. Hi, honey, it's Mom. I think there's a problem with the water bill. Could you, maybe just check? Call me back when you get this, okay? Love you. Josephine could almost see her mother, pacing the kitchen with the cordless phone clutched in both hands, chewing the inside of her cheek the way she always did when stressed. Then Harold's voice, rough, angry. Josephine, what the hell is going on? We got notices from the electric company. The damn internet's down, the lights are flickering. You better fix this. You hear me? You owe us. After everything we've done for you. He hung up before finishing the sentence, the recording cutting off with a sharp beep. Josephine let the phone drop onto the table with a hollow clatter. She owed them nothing. The full crash came in stages. Little by little, the way a dam starts to leak before it bursts. Neighbors noticed first. Mr. Halloran from 2 doors down mentioned it at the grocery store when Josephine bumped into him. Your folks doing okay? He asked, shifting his bag of potatoes from one arm to the other. Saw a service van out front last night. Thought maybe the pipes froze or something. Josephine offered a polite smile, shrugged. I'm not sure. I don't really live there anymore. The gossip trickled through town like slow-moving molasses. Everyone knew that Harold hadn't held a job in years, that Daniela's part-time library wages barely covered groceries. Without Josephine's steady hand behind the scenes, the cracks widened faster than they could patch them. The electricity went out for good on a Saturday. The water followed a few days later. The internet service cut out, leaving Nathan furious and stranded with his half-finished homework and frozen gaming screens. They tried to call Josephine again. And again. And again. At first, she muted the ringer. Then she blocked the numbers altogether. Nathan, desperate and aching, even tried messaging her on social media. A short, miserable plea. Joe, please. They're freaking out. Dad's freaking out. It's bad. Josephine sat in bed that night, reading the message in the dim glow of her phone, her heart aching. She missed him. God, she missed her little brother. But not enough to crawl back into the fire. She didn't reply. She couldn't. This wasn't her responsibility anymore. They had made that decision for her on Christmas Eve. Within 2 weeks, an eviction notice was taped to the front door, its bright orange edges flapping in the January wind. Josephine drove past once, late at night, on a whim she couldn't explain. She watched from a distance as Harold yanked at the notice with a furious snarl, crumpling it in his fist and hurling it into the snow. Daniela stood behind him, arms wrapped tightly around herself, head bowed. Nathan kicked at a snowbank, his breath fogging the air, shoulders hunched against the cold. The house itself seemed to sag under the weight of their defeat. Dark, hollow, broken. For a brief moment, Josephine felt something twist deep inside her. Guilt, sadness, some stubborn ember of loyalty. But she remembered the slam of the knife on the Christmas table. The words. The silence. The door that had shut behind her as she walked into the freezing night. And she felt herself harden again, like water turning to ice. She drove away without looking back. The unraveling was complete. They were on their own now, exactly as they had demanded. It began with a knock. Soft at first, almost polite, a tentative tap-tap against the peeling paint of her apartment door. Josephine stiffened where she sat on the living room floor, a half-eaten bowl of noodles cooling beside her. Another knock, louder this time. Insistent. She moved silently, heart thudding, slipping her phone into her pocket as she crept to the peephole. Through the fisheye lens, the hallway outside twisted and blurred, but she recognized the figure instantly. Daniela. Her mother stood outside, bundled in a too-thin jacket, a plastic grocery bag dangling from one hand, as if bringing some offering would soften the betrayal. Her face was pale, pinched with cold and something sharper. Desperation, maybe. Or shame. Josephine backed away from the door without a sound. She pressed her spine against the wall, breathing shallowly, willing herself invisible. A part of her, the small, aching part that still remembered bedtime stories and shared cups of cocoa, wanted to fling open the door, to gather her mother into her arms and pretend none of it had ever happened. But that part had learned the hard way. Love without respect was a chain, not a bond. The knocking faded. Daniela stood there a few minutes longer, shifting from foot to foot, glancing down the hallway as if unsure whether to wait or retreat. Finally, with a defeated slump of her shoulders, she turned and disappeared down the stairs. Josephine slid to the floor, knees tucked to her chest, listening to the fading echo of her mother's footsteps. She didn't move until the building was silent again. The messages started that night. Not from her mother. No, Daniela had never been the direct one, but from Harold. First an email. You think you're better than us now? You're nothing without this family. Then a voicemail. Pick up the damn phone. We're freezing. We can't pay the bills, and it's your fault. Followed by a text. You ungrateful little brat. After everything we did for you. The venom didn't surprise her. Not anymore. But still, the old wounds ached as they reopened, as if the words themselves carried tiny, serrated blades. Then came Nathan's message, shorter, rawer. Joe, I don't care what happened. Please. Just talk to me. Josephine held the phone in trembling fingers, staring at the notification for a long, painful moment. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Nathan hadn't betrayed her. Nathan hadn't slammed the knife onto the table that night. Nathan hadn't thrown her into the street like a stray dog. But Nathan had stayed silent. And sometimes, silence was as sharp as any blade. She placed the phone gently face down on the kitchen counter and walked away. Some doors, once closed, could not be reopened without bringing the storm back in. The next day, the messages changed. Daniela sent a carefully worded apology through Facebook Messenger, the modern equivalent of slipping a letter under a locked door. We didn't mean it, honey. Your father was drunk. He didn't know what he was saying. We need you. Please come home. There was no home. Not for her. Only a house she had once tried to patch together with duct tape and whispered hope. A house that had spat her out the second she stopped being useful. Josephine didn't respond. She watched the three little dots, the typing indicator, appear and disappear, like the pulse of a dying thing. Eventually, the messages stopped. But not before one final hailstorm of rage arrived. A voicemail from Harold, so furious and slurred she could barely make out the words. You'll regret this. You'll come crawling back. Don't think you're better than your family, Josephine. No one else will ever care about you the way we did. She deleted it without listening twice. Without blinking. Without guilt. Days turned into a week. A week turned into 2. The silence that followed was different from the silence she had once endured at the dinner table, thick with judgment and quiet demands. This silence was clean. This silence was earned. Every time Josephine thought about answering, a memory rose up in her mind. Her father's face twisted with contempt. Her mother's turned-away eyes. The bitter slam of the door behind her on Christmas Eve. No. She had given everything once, and they had thrown it away like yesterday's trash. She would not be their crutch anymore. She would not be their scapegoat. She would not go back. And so, the messages remained unread. The voicemails remained unplayed. The apologies, the threats, the guilt, all of it floated into the void where her obedience used to live, unanswered and unwelcome. One night, curled beneath a patchwork quilt on her thrift store couch, Josephine scrolled through her photos. Old snapshots flickered across the cracked screen. Nathan's lopsided grin, one arm slung around her shoulders. Daniela's birthday cake, slumping slightly in the middle. A younger Josephine, smiling shyly at the camera, hope blooming in her eyes. She studied that younger version of herself, the girl who had believed that love was something you earned by suffering quietly enough, by giving endlessly without asking for anything back. Josephine closed the photo app and set the phone aside. She wasn't that girl anymore. She wasn't anyone's silent martyr. As the city lights blinked through the thin curtains and the radiator sputtered warmth into the room, Josephine pulled the blanket tighter around her and whispered into the darkness. I am enough. And for the first time in her life, she believed it. Spring arrived like a soft exhale over the city. The ice melted first, slow rivers cutting through the gray sidewalks. Tiny buds forced their way through the cracks in the pavement, stubborn and bright, like life refusing to surrender. The air shifted, still cold in the mornings, but warmer in the afternoons, carrying the scent of earth and something new. Josephine felt it too in her bones. Each morning, she woke before her alarm, sunlight sneaking between the curtains, warming the small, imperfect apartment that now felt more like home than anywhere ever had. She had bought second-hand furniture piece by piece. A faded blue couch, a coffee table covered in old nicks and scratches, a bookshelf slowly filling with novels she loved. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Every chipped mug, every hand-sewn pillowcase, every creaky drawer, hers. Her job at the insurance company had shifted too. A promotion, small but meaningful, came after her manager noticed her steadiness, her resilience. She wasn't the loudest voice in the meetings, nor the one with the flashiest ideas. But she was the one who got things done, who showed up when she said she would, who quietly made the machine run smoother. For the first time, people saw her not as a burden, not as an obligation, but as something strong. Something necessary. Josephine found friends too, slowly, carefully. A co-worker who invited her out for coffee after a long shift. A neighbor across the hall who baked too many cookies and insisted Josephine take some. An old college acquaintance who spotted her at the bookstore and pulled her into an easy, laughing conversation that stretched into an afternoon. Piece by piece, she rebuilt a life. Not the life she had been given. The life she chose. One Saturday in late April, with the afternoon sun warm on her back, Josephine found herself driving through her old neighborhood again. She hadn't planned it. It just happened. A whim, a ghost tugging gently at the edges of her mind. The streets looked the same sagging roofs, the same crooked mailboxes, but somehow different. Smaller somehow. Less overwhelming. Like walking through the set of a play that had long since ended. She turned onto her old street. There it was. The house. Or what was left of it. The windows were boarded up now, rough plywood nailed hastily over the frames. The grass had grown wild, patches of brown and green wrestling each other for space. The front door hung crooked on its hinges, a battered "For Sale" sign staked into the dead lawn at a defeated angle. Josephine parked across the street, engine idling. She sat there for a long moment, just looking. Memories flitted across her mind, some sweet, most bitter. She saw herself as a little girl, racing up those cracked steps with a backpack bouncing against her shoulders. She saw herself older, carrying groceries through the door, balancing overdue bills in one hand and a bag of dollar store Christmas decorations in the other. She saw herself, Christmas Eve, standing frozen in the doorway, Harold's voice like a blade across her soul. But none of it hurt the way it used to. The house had crumbled under its own weight, its own refusal to change. It had hollowed itself out long before the utilities were cut, long before the eviction notices. She hadn't broken it. They had. Josephine cut the engine, letting the sudden silence wrap around her. For a moment, she considered getting out of the car, walking up the driveway, peeking through the cracks in the boarded windows. But something inside her said no. Some places didn't deserve a goodbye. She didn't owe this house a damn thing. Josephine smiled, soft and genuine, and put the car back into gear. She drove away without looking back, her hands steady on the wheel, the sun warm through the windshield. Ahead of her, the city stretched wide and golden, streets winding into unknown neighborhoods, bridges arching over sparkling rivers, parks bursting with new green life. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It wasn't wrapped in neat bows or triumphant music. It was real. It was messy. It was beautiful. It was hers. As she turned onto a sun-drenched avenue she had never traveled before, Josephine felt something settle inside her. Not the hard armor she had worn for so long, but something lighter, softer. Hope. A new beginning. And for the first time in a very, very long time, she wasn't surviving. She was living. We have come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.